And today we have closed captioning available thanks to Access Resource. And so at the bottom of your screen, you can toggle on the closed captioning if you would like to have that as a resource. And we are now streaming live on Facebook. So thanks everybody for being here today for the Decision Making Options webinar. I'm going to get started here. Before we start with the presentation, I just wanted to do some easy housekeeping things, if you will. We do have closed captioning today, again, thanks to Access Resourcing. So at Access Resource. So at the bottom of your screen, you can click on closed captioning if you would like that. We also are live streaming this on Facebook and recording it, so you can have your video on or off, whatever your preference would be for the presentation. And if you would like to change your name, you can do so by clicking the three buttons in the upper right-hand corner of your video screen. For the entirety of the presentation, please turn your microphones off. This will make sure that Zoom prioritizes my voice during the presentation so that we can make sure that it's easy for everybody to hear. And now we will start. Okay, so here we go. Welcome to the Decision Making, Guardianship, and Less Restrictive Options presentation. My name is Alicia Wolf. I work with the ARC Minnesota, and I've been here for about 7 years now. During my time here, I've worked as the guardianship advocate and as a future planning specialist. So I assist families with thinking about the future and planning, which I'll talk just a little bit about right at the beginning of the presentation. Also, I wanted to note that we will have a question and answers segment at the end of this presentation. Well, I'll leave about 10 or 15 minutes for this. So you can put any questions throughout the presentation in the chat box. My coworker Ryan will be monitoring those. And so we will make sure that we answer all the questions and get in touch after the presentation. Again, this will be recorded and posted on our website after so people can tune in at any time. The ARC Minnesota is a nonprofit grassroots organization out of the whole state of Minnesota. We serve across the state, and our mission is to promote and protect the human rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we want to make sure that people have access to be supported in the community and live a life of their choice. And that's what our mission is. We provide services from childhood through adulthood. I say that we're the first stop shop for anything disability related. So if you had any questions, you can reach out to us for support. We work in a lot of different areas. Just off of the top of my head, we support people in information about guardianship, like we're here today all learning together. We support people in abuse prevention and medical assistance and transportation and county services. We do a lot of policy work. We support people in a variety of areas. So if you have any questions or if you're feeling stuck, you can call us for support. One of the things that I like to mention in this presentation that is a service that we provide is our planning services. When I say planning services, I mean thinking about the future and planning. And I bring it up in this presentation because often when people are thinking about guardianship, it means that their child is about ready to turn 18, or they are at some sort of other transition in their life. So they are already at a point where you're thinking about the future. And our planning services work is where people and families work one-on-one with our ARC planning specialists and support people in doing that future planning work. So our Future Life Options program started when families were saying to us, I'm the sole caretaker for my son or daughter with a disability. What happens if something were to happen for me? How do I plan for the future? And that means 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. So it's planning for a good life now and well into the future. And we also guide people through legal planning and financial planning, which is the wills and the trusts and all of that kind of stuff. And then we have our Future And then we have our transition vision project and person-centered planning, which is helping people think intentionally about their lives and create a plan with their voice in the center. Our Get Set Online tool is a interest quiz targeted at high school youth to start to think about what they want their life to look like after graduation. Our Transition to Adulthood workbook is specifically for caregivers that have people that are supporting people with disabilities that are transitioning from school life, so high school, to adult life, and wanting to think through how that transition is going to happen and how they can best support their child. And then at the end of this list, Focus on the Future is a future planning podcast by the ARC Minnesota, where I talk about a variety of different things that people are considering when they think about future planning. So I have interviewed an attorney and we talk about trust. I interviewed a financial planner and we talk about the joys of financial planning. Everything from sibling issues to considerations of vulnerability to the ABLE account, to just generally what makes a good life and how you can plan for a good life. So that Focus on the Future podcast can be found anywhere that you find podcasts. I would highly recommend you take a listen. Each episode is 30 to 40 minutes in length and touches on a handful of different topics. So now let's get into decision making. Often when people think about decision making, they think about guardianship. And that's typically the conversation that has been had throughout the course of the years. If you have a child with a disability, then you get to 17 and a half, and people are saying, oh, well, it's time to consider guardianship. Because historically, that has been how the conversation has gone. And I wanted to just start this conversation by saying it's not a one-size-fits-all. Guardianship is one option of a variety of different options that we'll talk about here today. So as you can see, all of the different characters and animals staring into the store, everybody needs different supports. And so everybody's supports are going to look differently. So even though if people are told at an IEP meeting that they now need to do guardianship, what it really means is that people are saying, well, you now need to think about how a person can be supported in making decisions in the future. And where do we start in this conversation? I like to say that we should start by presuming competence. For a long time in disability services and as caregivers and support workers, we have unintentionally presumed incompetence. And so this means that we plan for the future in preparation for the person to fail or to need help. And so what we're saying here is that we want to presume competence. We want to presume that the person is capable and able to make their own decisions. And we want to think about how they need support in more of a positive light. Because if we think about a person as being incompetent, then we are planning for future supports in more of a negative light. Now, presuming competence doesn't mean that a person just doesn't need any assistance. It's just a different way of starting that conversation. So we want to presume that people do have the capacity to make decisions and learn and grow over time. And this ties into the history of guardianship. So as we are all familiar with the days of institutionalization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, if you had a child with a disability, back in any time previous to the 70s, really, a lot of people were institutionalized, so sent to state hospitals to get care and were to live there full time. And then parents started to say, no, I want my child to live at home. I want them to be supported at home. And so we went away with institutionalization. But one thing that has stayed is this draw to guardianship. And so guardianship is the legal restriction of somebody's rights to have somebody else make decisions on their behalf. And so guardianship was always a go-to. It was, oh, you have a disability, then you need a guardian. You need somebody to make your decisions for you. You need somebody to care for you. And I mentioned the days of institutionalization because they have pretty similar thought patterns. So we are starting to say now that we know that people with disabilities have the capacity and the ability to learn over time. And so it's not necessarily you have a disability, you need a guardian. There's a lot of different options, again, which this presentation is all about. And so if you hear, oh, your child is turning 18, you need a guardian, that's what has been true. And that's the conversation that has happened in the past. But now that we're moving forward as a society and we know more, we're doing better. And so back to where to start. What specifically do you know a person will need help with? So this is when you're starting to think about the decisions that you know your loved one needs help in making. So if your son or daughter is about to turn 18 and people are saying, oh, consider guardianship. Now we are encouraging people to break down what specific help a person needs in making decisions. And I bring up the point of good or bad decisions because at 18, I can think of many times that I made a decision that my mom probably didn't agree with or that she thought was a bad decision. And me making those bad decisions led me to learn from those mistakes and make better choices in the future. It's important to know what kind of help a person needs before you go through the guardianship process, because it very well could be that a person could be supported in making decisions without going through the legal process of guardianship. So breaking it down, really writing down, try to journal specifically what kind of help you think a person really needs on a day-to-day basis in making decisions. And as you can see here in this graphic that I borrowed from the ARC Wisconsin, decision-making supports are on kind of a sliding scale or a spectrum, if you will. So as you see here, there's a few different examples of tools that people with disabilities can use to get assistance in making decisions. So before, as I mentioned, the conversation was, oh, if you have a disability, get guardianship. And we're working our way out of that now, which is really, really wonderful because we're not restricting people's rights just solely based off of the fact that they have a disability. And as you can see, guardianship is on the far right hand of this scale. And this is a limited or a full guardianship. So that's the legal restriction of somebody's rights. On the other end of that, on the left side, it's a release form where I could sign a release of information so that anyone, a friend of mine, a parent, could talk to my doctor and help me understand what the doctor is saying if there was something that they were suggesting. So there's this continuum of resources available from a release of information all the way to a formal legal guardianship. And we're going to be talking about these all in depth. So supported decision-making. Supported decision-making is the support in helping somebody make a decision. It's making sure that a person has help in making their own decision. But at the end of the day, it's still the person's decision themselves. So supported decision-making can look like the variety of things listed here, in which I love the Beatles song, I Get By with a Little Help from My Friends. Because if I think about the decisions that I make on a day-to-day basis, I usually seek out a few different opinions. I may text my best friend or talk to my partner or call my mom, and all of their different opinions help inform me on what my final decision should be. And so I still, like many people, seek out help. Like for instance, if I were to need surgery, if I needed to replace my knee, if I went into the doctor and I needed a knee surgery, then I would look to the advice of the doctor. I would look to the advice of somebody that I knew had a knee surgery before. And all of this practice and having me practice how to reach out for help and seek out multiple people and their information and their experience, that is supported decision making. And so that's what I have listed as general support. And then further as circle of support. So circle of support is if you visualize who is in your life, who helps you make decisions, and you kind of think about it as a circle around you. You know, if I always use the example, if I went out and I had a flat tire, I don't know how to change a tire. That's just never a skill that somebody taught me how to do. I have no idea how to do that. That doesn't mean that I am incapable of learning how to change a flat tire. That just means at this point in my life, I haven't learned that. But I do know that I can call my insurance company and they can send out somebody to help me replace my tire. Or I could call my uncle and be guided through that. That's my circle of support. Those are the people that I can call on and know who to reach out to make those decisions. A supported decision-making agreement is a contract. I'm using quotes, a contract, if you will. And this contract isn't a legal contract. It's basically just a written agreement, and it goes through a list of areas that a person may need help in. So if it's I need help in making decisions about my medical care, or I need help in making decisions about where to live, then you can go through this supported decision-making agreement, check off what you need help with, and then you can specifically say who the person is going to be who helps you through these decision-making choices. I use that often as I often use the example of if somebody is first driving when they're 16 years old and they make a contract with their parents of when they're allowed to use the car and under which situations. That decision-making agreement isn't legal in Minnesota, but it is a really great resource for people to know who specifically they can reach out to. A release of information is also a great resource in helping people stay informed about what their care looks like. You can sign a release of information with a doctor's office or with a school or with anywhere where there's HIPAA laws involved. An authorized representative could be a great support. An authorized representative is somebody who is signed on to medical assistance to help navigate that system with somebody. A joint bank account is a good way for people to get help in money and saving money and still have their parents' support after 18. And an ABLE account is a great supported decision-making resource, because an ABLE account, just really briefly on that, an ABLE account allows a person with a disability to save up to $15,000 a year without it impacting their government benefits. So if a person is on Social Security, SSI, they can only have $2,000 to their name. And that doesn't give people a lot of opportunity to save money. So an ABLE account allows people to save their own money up to $15,000 a year without it disqualifying them from government benefits. And this can be a great support in saving money and learning how to manage their own money. And I do want to mention too that this presentation could easily be a half day or a full day presentation that really went into all of the different options and how to make it work. The point of this presentation is just a good higher level overview of what people's options are when they're thinking about how to support somebody in making decisions post 18. So there's supported decision making where people are supported in their decision making, and then there is substitute decision making where people have somebody else making the decisions for them, thereby it being substitute. So a power of attorney is a substitute decision-making process because a person, so if it was me, so if I had a disability, I could say, okay, I want my mom to help me make my healthcare decisions or my financial decisions. So we could create a healthcare power of attorney or a financial power of attorney, and I would then willingly give those decision-making rights to somebody else. And that's why it's substitutes. I'm giving that right to somebody else to make those decisions on my behalf. A healthcare directive can be a future planning tool and also a way for people to get help in making healthcare decisions now. A healthcare directive is a form that allows you to name an agent, and that agent makes healthcare decisions in times that you're incapacitated and you can't make those decisions on your own. There is a whole episode about healthcare directives on the Focus on the Future podcast, if you wanted more specific information about that as well. A representative payee is a person who helps people spend and manage their Social Security payments. So if a person's receiving SSI, supplementary security income, then Social Security writes the check to the person directly or to the representative payee. And so if a person needed a lot of support in managing the money coming in from Social Security, they could have a representative payee. And then that check would be written to the rep payee, and then that person would make sure that rent is paid, bills are paid, and would help people manage that Social Security money. Because often when people are thinking about decision-making post-18, they're usually worried about finances and vulnerability. And so a representative payee, if that was one of the main forms of income, could really support somebody in having that substitute decision-making support, but not going all the way to a guardianship. A supplemental or a special needs trust is also a way for people to get help in spending and saving money. A supplemental and special needs trust is a whole hour-long presentation itself, but really briefly, a trust is a way for people to have large amounts of money that is for them, but not in their name. So if a person gets an inheritance from a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, or if they get a settlement from an accident and they have $200,000, they can have this money in a trust where it doesn't affect their benefits, but they can't have it directly in their name. And that trust is managed by a trustee. So again, somebody else to manage that money and to say where that money goes, but not directly the person. And then as we saw on the sliding scale of decision-making support, guardianship is at the tail end of that in being the most restrictive substitute decision-making process. And I'm saying most restrictive decision-making process because that's just the reality of what it is. Guardianship is a court process where you prove to a judge that a person is incapable of making their own decisions and thereby have to have it removed. And then the court designates a guardian to step into that role. Now, I mention all of the supported decision-making options first because, of course, the ARC believes that if people are able to make their own decisions with support and help from other people, we want that to be the first option. And we also know that not everybody is able to make their own decisions. And so guardianship is something that we include, and it is a resource. And we would never say that guardianship isn't needed ever, but it is just one option of the many decision-making supports that somebody can receive. Now, guardianship comes in 7 different powers. So when you're thinking about what specific areas a person needs help in, like I prompted at the beginning of this presentation, you probably picked out that, maybe a person needs help with managing finances, or maybe they need help with medical decisions. So I encourage people to start to think about that first. Think about what help a person specifically needs, because then you can see if those supported decision-making options could be enough help for a person, or if you needed to go all the way to guardianship. Now, guardianship in Minnesota, again, comes in 7 different powers. And in Minnesota, you can pick and choose only in exactly what powers a person needs. So a person could just need 2 areas of guardianship, and that would be a limited guardianship. And again, we encourage these wherever possible as well. So to go through them briefly, the first one, determining place of abode, that's where a person lives. The second is care, comfort, and maintenance. And this mostly covers academic and vocational services. So managing an IEP or setting up job coaching or job supports would fall into number 2 there. Number 3 is reasonable care for personal effects, clothing and furniture. Usually if people are doing a limited guardianship, this is one that would get left off because people can get a lot of supports in managing their personal possessions through alternatives and support from family and loved ones. Number 4 is medical and other professional care. So this means as guardian, it is the guardian's responsibility to make sure the person has access to good health care, is set up with a therapist that works for them, is taking medications that their body needs. Now, this doesn't mean that a person this doesn't mean that a guardian has to go to every single doctor appointment, but it does mean that overall the guardian knows what and is managing the person's medical supports. With this being said too, I always think here's a good point to mention, guardians can't make people take a medication. They can't make people go to a doctor's appointment. So a lot of times I'll talk with parents and it'll be a conversation around, oh, we need guardianship because of this, and this reason, and I think it'll fix the issues that we're up against. Guardianship isn't set up to fix an issue or to make an issue easier. Guardianship itself is really the decision making and setting things up that work for the person. But a person still has civil and constitutional rights, so they can still refuse to take a medication or to go to a doctor's appointment. So it's not necessarily going to fix some of the issues that people are coming up against, but it'll make so that a person can have those services set up. Number 5, approval or withholding of contracts. So this means that if you have this guardianship power, any contracts will not be legally binding until the guardian's signature is on it also. This is different than co-signing. Co-signing is when a person is saying that they're financially responsible for anything that the person didn't pay. Guardianship is just authorizing that contract to be valid. So if we use the example of signing up for a credit card, credit card companies don't pull guardianship information. So a person could still go and sign up for a credit card and have that credit card for a few months. And then the guardian could find out about it later, call the credit card company and say, hey, this was never a legal document. We need to terminate this credit card. It's not necessarily going to be an easy process because the credit card company is still going to want that contract, but that is a power within guardianship. Any money spent on that credit card still has to be paid off. So that's still, a natural repercussion of signing up for that credit card. So again, it's not necessarily going to fix some of the concerns that people may have, as much as it is going to allow people to make decisions on behalf of somebody. 6, supervisory authority. This means that as guardian, you have the ability to know who a person is spending time with, and if somebody is of distinct harm to the person under guardianship, then they can withhold access to that person. So it's not a restraining order, but it is saying, hey, we're gonna, you startled me, sorry. We're going to hold questions for the end. Okay, thank you. And then number 7, accessing government benefits. So that is, a guardian has the ability to apply for Social Security on somebody's behalf, medical assistance, all of those government benefits. I kind of chuckled to myself on this one because if I had a disability and needed those supports, then I would be needing a guardian also, because those are just really hard systems to manage. So these are the guardianship powers. All 7 would be a full guardianship. And if you were to pick and choose what is needed, it would be a limited guardianship. I see a bunch of questions coming in on the chat, so thanks. You can continue to put your questions there, and I'll do the Q&A at the end. So people under guardianship still have rights, civil and constitutional rights, and this is everything from the right to be treated with dignity and respect, to the right to privacy, to the right to get married and have children, to the right to see who they want and spend time with who they want. So a person under guardianship has a Bill of Rights, and we'd be happy to send this to you. You can also find it on the Minnesota Guardianship and Conservatorship website at minnesotaguardianship.org. So if a person is under guardianship, they still have rights. And if they are getting supported through supported decision-making, then they have the rights and the abilities of any American citizen. So 2020 was a big year of reform as far as guardianship goes. I included the little graphic here, the mindsets. And one side is a fixed mindset, and it says, I'm as smart as I'm ever going to be. And the other side is the growth mindset that says, intelligence is a changeable quality and a potential that can be developed. So we know that the decisions that we made when we were 18 are vastly different than the decisions that we made when we were 30 and 40 and 50. People learn as they practice how to make choices. And that's another reason why we here at the ARC really encourage supported decision making, because if people have the option to make their own decisions and learn from what those decisions lead to, then we're only going to make better and better choices in the future. So in 2020, we, the ARC, were major supporters of a bill that was passed and enacted on August 1st that approved of time-limited guardianships. So this means that anybody petitioning for a new guardianship and is under the age of 30, that guardianship will be time limited, up to 6 years in length. So if you have a child who is about to turn 18, then their guardianship will be time limited. So in 6 years, you'll have to go back to court and prove the continued need for guardianship, or the guardianship would just disappear. And this is a wonderful progress in guardianship reform, because again, the decisions that we make when we're 18 are very different than the decisions that we make when we're 25 or 30 years old. And so the time-limited guardianship means that people will constantly be rethinking what works as far as decision-making support and what doesn't work. Because previously, if you got a guardianship at 18, you had that guardianship for the rest of your life. And so this is a really wonderful step of progress in moving forward and making sure that people with disabilities are presumed competent and have the ability to make their own decisions over the course of time. Now, if you know somebody who already has a guardianship prior to August 1st, then their guardianship is just consistent, and that won't change unless they go to court and try to terminate it or change their guardianship. So this time-limited guardianship is for anybody from this point forward, if they're under the age of 30. Another change in the 2020 reform was that petitioners, so parents, if you're petitioning for guardianship, petitioners must prove that less restrictive options are not enough to support somebody in decision-making. Which means if you go to court and you petition for guardianship, you have to explain to the judge why all of those supported decision-making options that I went over earlier are not enough to help the person in making decisions, and why a guardianship is absolutely necessary. Before, many judges practiced that, and it was a best practice among judges and amongst the courts, but now it's a requirement. So if you seek out guardianship over somebody, you have to prove why these less restrictive options are not enough. And again, this goes to the history of guardianship, how for many years it was, if you have a disability, you need a guardian. And now we're changing that, and we're really saying not everybody with a disability needs a guardian, but everybody, disability or not, does need help in making decisions, right? Like if I think about my own personal experience, when I was 18, my mom had to coach me for literally hours to help me know how to call my healthcare insurance and to know what questions to ask. And that was the help that I needed at that time. In the 2020 reform, there was also a lot of language changes, which is another great sign of progress. So previously, if you were a person under guardianship, you were referred to as a ward, W-A-R-D. And the term ward came with a lot of feelings and evoked a lot of hurt for many people because of its historical context. And so back before August 1st, if you were under guardianship, you were considered a ward. But now you're a person under guardianship. So you are a person that is needing that guardianship service. So there was that language change as well as a few others. So some questions that I usually get as far as guardianship itself is concerned. You can do a full or a limited guardianship. Again, those 7 powers are pick and choose specifically and only what a person needs. A guardian is not financially responsible for a person. So in that instance where I, gave the credit card example, a guardian would not be responsible to pay off that credit card. A guardian is not responsible to pay somebody's rent if they have that power of guardianship. Also to note, in these 7 powers of guardianship, financial powers is not one of them. So if a guardian has power over medical or other professional care, that would mean that it's a guardian's responsibility to make sure that those medical bills are paid, but it's not the guardian's responsibility to pay them. And there is no specific financial power of guardianship because if you look on the very bottom here, it says guardianship versus conservatorship. Guardianship is decisions over the person. Conservatorship is decisions over the estate. Now, I don't usually or ever recommend a conservatorship because it is a great amount of power over somebody's finances, and it's a lot of work for the conservator. You have to do monthly reportings to the court, and usually people can be supported through alternatives or through other decision-making supports, not necessarily needing a conservatorship. You can have co-guardians, so there could be 2 parents or a parent and an adult sibling that could be guardians. I apologize that the graphic is off here, but again, like I've mentioned many times, a disability does not equal the need for a guardian. And there are ongoing responsibilities for the guardian if that guardianship is established. Like I had just mentioned, in 6 years, if there's a time-limited guardianship, you have to go back to court to prove if the guardianship is still needed. And then there's also annual reporting duties for guardians every year to make sure that the guardian is still doing their job and to make sure the guardianship is still needed and to make sure the person is getting that specific level of care. And I really liked this graphic specifically. So in the center, it says decision-making process. And around the edges, it says everything that goes in with how to make decisions. You gather facts and you brainstorm. You consider pros and cons. And then you make a decision and you decide. And then you follow through. And then it starts by defining or going through that clarity. So this is true in any decision that we make. So if you were a guardian or if you were supporting somebody in making a decision about let's say if they wanted to have a knee surgery or not, you would define what the decision was, and you would clarify to make sure that the person understood what that decision was. You would gather facts. So you would understand what options there were with having that knee surgery. You would brainstorm if you wanted to do that option, or what other choices you had. You would weigh the pros and cons, and then you would decide, and you would follow through. And this is the same, I want everybody to consider the same process in deciding what kinds of decision-making supports a person with a disability may need. So if you have a child who is about to turn 18, you can go through this exact same process in just simply determining what decision-making help they need. So define or clarify what specific help they need and what supports in what different decision-making areas. You can gather facts. You can look at all of the different options. You can brainstorm what could work, what doesn't work, because again, each person is an individual, weigh the pros and cons, decide, and go through the process.
Excuse me.
We're almost to questions, just one moment. And so, yeah, so through the process of making decisions, guardianship again is just one option. Okay, so let's go to questions. I'm going to start by what is in the chat box. Okay, thank you, everybody. Continue to add questions here if you want. Tamara asked, is this being recorded for later review? It is indeed. We will be downloading this and recording it on our website and on our YouTube page once the presentation is done. Okay, so that is the bulk of the questions. I also wanted to, Will, just one moment. I wanted to say the guardianship, the process of going through the legal process of guardianship can happen at any time. A lot of people think that it's do it at 18 or not at all, but you can do it at any time. So let's say that you were on the fence about what help a person needed and you just weren't sure. You could try alternatives, or you could try those less restrictive options for a year or two. And then if they didn't work, if it came to be that you did need guardianship, you could come back to that later. And you could do that at 19 or at 20 years old. So there's no do it at 18 or don't do it at all. It can happen at any time, and you can set up supports to help a person. Okay, continue to put questions in the chat, but I'll let Will ask his question now. Go ahead, Will. You'll have to unmute yourself first.
My name is William, actually. And like in a therapist, if a therapist doesn't work real well, and I've seen a certain therapist that hasn't helped, is that a time to ask for a different therapist or your social worker?
So if a therapist isn't working for you, absolutely, you don't have to go to that person anymore, and you can request somebody new to help you out. If you have a guardian
I can hear you. Can you speak up?
You can't hear me? Okay, yeah, so if
Can you speak, please?
You can certainly change the guardian or the therapist if they're not working for you.
I'm hearing stuff. for the
I'm sorry, Will. Maybe you should call me and then we can talk about it individually. But overall, you can change a therapist at any time if they're not working for you, and a guardian can do that. Or if a person doesn't have a guardian, they can do that themselves. Tamara just asked another question. Do you need to go through a legal person to do the paperwork, or can it be done without fees or having to pay legal fees? That's a great question. So if I go back to my slide. Okay, so on this slide specifically, that the release of information, the supported decision-making agreements, the representative payee, none of those need legal representation. So doing these less restrictive options are more cost efficient and easier to set up than going through the legal process. Guardianship, we do recommend that people work with an attorney, and the ARC Minnesota has a list of attorneys that can help people. And a power of attorney, we also recommend that if people are setting up a power of attorney for decision-making help for a person with a disability, we recommend that you go to an attorney to set this up as well, because a power of attorney can be set up to work in many different ways. And if we're going to use a power of attorney to help a person with a disability make decisions, we want to make sure that that power of attorney is set up correctly. So we do recommend that you work with an attorney to set up a power of attorney. And the guardianship question, it is important that you work with an attorney, especially in guardianship, because again, you have to prove why those less restrictive options are not enough to support somebody and why a guardianship is absolutely necessary. And a petition for guardianship is public record. So a petition for guardianship, anybody could pull up that information. So an attorney knows specifically what to put on that petition to make sure that it's not too much information that doesn't need to be given to the courts, but to also make sure that it's enough to validate the reason for guardianship. In some counties throughout the state of Minnesota, there is a process called IFP. IF as in Frank, P as in Paul. It stands for in forma pauperis. And IFP means that people can have guardianship done at low to no cost if the person under guardianship is considered low income. And many counties in the state of Minnesota have IFP as an option where the courts will waive the court fees and pay for the attorney to do the work, but not all counties. So you can call us to chat about that or look at our attorney list as well. So we buzzed through that presentation, but if anybody else has any questions, I would be happy to take them.
Hi, Alicia. This is Ryan. So I also work for the ARC Minnesota. I'm helping to support with the questions. And there was one that came from Hope. Just want to let everybody know. So her question was around, can we get this presentation in order to print out some of these pieces? So at this point, what I've shared with her is to reach out to Alicia in order to get those specific presentation notes, because this will be recorded and also on our Facebook page, but you will not be able to print from that.
Yeah, so reach out to us. You can call our main line at 952-920-0855 and ask to speak with a guardianship advocate or Alicia Wolf. And I'm more than happy to chat with people individually to get that information. Hope also just messaged and said, very interested in the webinar on trusts and the ABLE account. So I recorded that one last year, and that is currently on our website and on our YouTube page. And so the title of that is Understanding Trusts and the ABLE account. That information is all still up to date and relevant. So the information for that presentation is all on our website. And we also have a episode specifically about trusts and about the ABLE account on the Focus on the Future podcast. So a few different ways that you can get that information. Great. I'll chill here just for another moment or two to see if any questions come in. Again, this presentation was about overall decision-making supports for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we didn't go too in-depth in how these specifically work or how you can set them up, because that's more of an individual conversation with people and what supports are actually needed for people on an individual basis. So think about this as more of an overview. And I think that we're going to wrap it up today with the presentation being 50 minutes. Everybody have a great day. And
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to tell I have a lot of questions. Could you and Lisa have a conversation with me sometime?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we should connect on the phone, just the two of us, so that I can answer your questions and it can stay confidential.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that.
Do you have time?
Oh, it looks like you muted. But yeah, you can call me this afternoon if you want.
You call me.
Okay, why don't you send me an email, or you can message me directly on here. Yeah, and
I don't
thank
know how
you.
to do that.
Okay, yeah, I'll reach out to you, William.
Sounds good.
Okay, yeah, we have your information. So thank you again, everybody. Have a really good rest of your day, and feel free to reach out with any questions. Thanks for taking the time.
Hold on, one more question that we had in there from Tamara, I believe it is. And it's totally off topic. And what her question is, do you have any information on developmental disabled individuals driving? So what I would recommend with that is, because our advocates specialize in certain areas, is either calling our main number and asking that question to the receptionist, or also doing it through our website through the Ask the Advocate feature, so that way it'll get routed to the appropriate advocate to give you the correct response.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, William, I'll reach out to you this afternoon. Everybody else, have a great day, and thanks for joining.
Adios, Ryan. Adios.
Goodbye, Bill.